नमस्कार, जय श्री कृष्ण, जय शंकर, जय गुरु. कैसे हैं आप? Chapter 5 is Pratyaksha Devata, Mother's Universal Form, and the book based on lecture series focusing on Acharya Shankar's Devi Bhujanga Stotra, Paradevta, God the Mother, by Swami Shri Ishwarananda Giriji Maharaj, who is sitting right here, right? And what should I say more? I feel like drawing your additional additional attention by practicing. So the joy, inexhaustible joy, becomes a part of our lives when we become clear about what life is. And am I saying that we are not clear about what life is? I think I just did that. So let us move towards a little bit of more clarity by connecting to Mother's universal form. And Mother is not separated from us because this is the universal Mother, so always with us. So let me begin uh, reading by thanking you and um, by bowing at the lotus feet of Swami Shri Ishwarananda Giriji Maharaj, invoking Guru Shakti. Here we go. Pratyaksha Devata, Mother's universal form. This is a very comprehensive meditation which touches upon certain significant aspects of the revelation of truth. The devotional communion. The necessity of the devotional or mystical approach is more or less accepted when we choose to see the Mother in Brahma. As Brahma is the origin of all creation, it permeates every pore of the created, the sentient as well as the insentient. Since it is the Mother, it can be comprehended only through tender feelings and a deep sense of belonging. But these feelings may not arise in a grown up man as naturally or instinctively as they do in a child. Perhaps man has ceased to be divinely normal and has become humanly corrupt. He needs to exercise his intellectual and mystical perceptions to understand the grand relationship between him and the Divine Mother and the nature of the power that projects the relationship. As the Acharya says in Vivek Chudamani, Avyaktanamani Paramesha Shaktirra Nadvaya Vidya Trigunatmika Parakarya Numeya Sudhi Maya Yaya Jagat Sarvamidam Prasuyate. This inscrutable Maya power, which is the ultimate cause of all creation, is the beginningless, self forgetting, the power of the supreme Godhood, unmanifest in itself, yet endowed with the potentialities of the three gunas. Only the excellent intellect can infer its nature through its effects. The excellence of the intellect in the above context does not consist so much in its capacity to grasp metaphysical concepts as in its ability to achieve immediate communion with truth artistically conveyed in symbols. Here it is more a question of emotion and absorption than of analysis and systematization. Yet most intellectuals engaged in the pursuit of truth have done exactly the latter. Ayam muninam gana prapancham mimitte. Sri Shankara says in the seventh sloka, these philosophers cannot but help measuring the world. To some extent, their hair splitting analysis and argumentation help one to avoid wrong notions about life or world manifestation. We have already seen how Vairagya, the precious fuel to ignite and sustain the stupendous course of the soul's psychic machinery towards the spiritual goal, is attained only by entering into the realities of worldly life. But merely going through the ordeals of life without alertness and understanding does not awaken in the ignoramus the power of Vairagya. The philosophies help us in developing this understanding and thus indirectly in cultivating Vairagya. Even to a purely intellectual seeker, these subtle discussions, if undertaken sincerely, are negatively significant in that he is led to futility of it all and is consequently directed towards the mystical approach. The Shvetashwaratara Upanishad very clearly states that great Brahmavadis deliberated for long on issues such as how Brahma is the ultimate cause, how we come into being and sustain our individualities, and so on. Having failed to reach a satisfactory conclusion, they resorted to Dhyana Yoga and realized the Devatma Shakti that was concealed in the layers of our own qualities. This points out to the fact that Brahma cannot be approached except through his Shakti, and that too has to be entered into through Upasana. Truth cannot be known, you only become it. Or we may say, you recognize it in yourself. The least compromise here will reduce truth to a known entity of an objective, separate existence, a jad, lacking self effulgence and hence limited and mortal. What is needed for the correct perception is not any means of ordinary knowing, but a special process called yoga, which removes all obstructions to the recognition of truth. But mere yoga also is not enough for this. Some kind of duality will always persist in any process of yoga. Somewhere in the last stages of yoga, you have to make a jump and bring the dualities to a close. Tasyapi nirodhe nirvijaha. This is a movement of love or self identification. This talent is developed by Upasana. Without knowing world nature, Upasana cannot be done properly. And without Upasana, mere analysis of the world is dry and meaningless. As samples, the master lists a few philosophical studies. The Shunyavadi considers the world as non existent, like the horn of a hare, since it does not stand the test of reasoning. Having accepted a hypothetical definition of truth as that which is unrelated, everlasting, and self existing, a severe search ultimately forces the intellectual Shunyavadi, who does not accept scriptural authority or God's grace or the Guru's validity, to the conclusion that there is no such a reality possible in the world as it appears. And hence, actually, there is no appearance. But however true to the intellect, this attitude is rejected on the basis of experience and the fundamental basis of the discussion itself. The question of what is truth is raised only on an accepted faith in life. We are to understand and explain the life form and not negate life itself. It is as absurd as proclaiming aloud, I am tongueless or I do not exist. If nothing is really there, then Shunyavad too is not there, and whatever that jugglery of words may convey, it means nothing because it helps us in no way, gives no meaning to life, and no goal to strive for. The world forms may be changing, may even be unreal in the sense of a dream, but even dreams have to be accounted for inasmuch as they are experienced. The object of appearance may be false, but that appearance itself is to be accepted as valid. As Shankara says, Nahi mrig trashna nika dayopi niraspada bhavanti. A pragmatic approach to life may make us swing to the other extreme also and land us in a camp of Charvak, who is mentioned here in the second alternative, Amrish Anyaha. The Charvak philosophy, systematized by an ancient sage named Brihaspati, holds that whatever you see and experience is real. It rejects the troublesome and strict definitions of truth assumed earlier and accepts the easy, practical, and popular saying, whatever works is true. And to make anything work by any means is the cleverness and success of life. Phalena parichiyate. Everything is judged by the fruits it produces and accepted as such. Nothing need to be assumed. You are the body and nothing more. Because we see that it is the body that is born and is named and identified as so and so. It is the body that grows, transacts with things and people, and propagates itself. It is the basis of life. Yes, it is true that one day it will decay and die. There's nothing to get disturbed about it. For when you will cease to be, who will worry about that? Who will worry about what? As long as life lasts, use and enjoy it well. But this simple attractive theory doesn't go very far to explain satisfactorily the states of existence in which this physical body does not have a part to play. It evades the question of consciousness and the cause of creation. It fails to give an elevating and soul satisfying meaning to life. It makes man no better than an intelligent animal. And therefore, the logician, Nyayayika, steps in to strike a compromise between the two extremes, Paro Mishra Menam. He accepts the world as a mixture of truth and untruth, the changing and the everlasting, inert matter and consciousness. He accepts the plurality of souls and the possibility of attaining salvation through the grace of Ishvara, a perfect, benign being. This grace is achieved by avoiding wrong perception and following the strict law of cause and effect, which produces and governs the universe. But the logician's explanation of the nature of Ishvara and the salvation he offers are not satisfactory. The perfection of the former and the permanence of the later do not stand the severe test of reasoning, nor can one understand the assumed mixing of the changing and the everlasting. The question of how matter can be everlasting and what differentiates one soul from another and the soul from God remains unanswered. Sankhya philosophy brings in an amount of clarity by recognizing two entirely different principles, the Purusha and the Prakriti, and attributes all the world phenomenon to the unscrutable power of Prakriti. While Purusha, the principle of awareness, stands apart, supremely unattached, and gets involved only in as much as he allows himself to be identified with the skillful and attractive modifications of Prakriti. Here again, the nature of Purusha and the cause of the original division are subjected to inquiry and to the authority of Vedic scriptures, which in the ultimate analysis speaks against the dualistic stand of Sankhya. In trying to resolve the conflict between the Advaita nature of truth and the Dvait setup of the world, as also between the subject and the object of any world experience, one school of Buddhists called Vijnanavada posits all world forms as mental projections and holds that the power of the mind, Vijnana, appearing as a stream of perceptions, is the only reality. These philosophers cite for their support the analogy of the river or the flame, which is nothing but a quick succession of droplets or burning molecules. Pool is referred to as here aparo buddhi matram. This view also is questionable as it cannot fully explain the common basis on which the stream of perception flows. The factor which consists two perceptions or the reality which recalls in an act of remembrance a past perception. Thus, we find all intellectual attempts to get at the nature of truth self defeating. They raise more problems than they can ever solve. Above all, they do not help to relieve the sorrows of the soul in bondage. Therefore, Sri Shankara, the king of philosophers, demolishes in a Shivananda Lahiri the dry scholastic approach with a single question Gato va mritapindo pyanurapicha du mo grin rachalah pato va tanturva pariharati kim ghora smamanam. You may try to gauge the causal nature of the world phenomena by analyzing how the pot came out of the lump of clay or how the perception of clothes arises from the arrangement of threads. But does it lessen your miseries in any way? He himself proceeds to answer Vratha Kanta Kshobam Vahasitarasa Tarkavayasa Padam Bhojam Sambha Rabhaja Parama Saukyam Amraja Suddhi. All the logical harangue only adds one more affliction, a sore throat. If you are intelligent, my dear, go and worship the lotus feet of Lord Shambhu and attain to the supersensuous joy of God experience. This idea of bhajan of the Lord's feet is expressed by the same master to this context. Tadeta tvamevati na tvam jahimaha. That world which so evades the evaluation of the philosophers, we see as your divine form and accept it. We never shall allow these world forms to deceive us and take us away from you. Here we are given a Mahavakya, resembling the famous Upanishadic statement, Sarvam Khalavidam Brahma, verily, all this is Brahma. How an aspirant achieves this perception of the divine in the world is explained in Vedantic texts in the metaphysical jargon using the technique of Bodha, Samana, the Karanya, Lakshan, etc. But this again will be an affliction. Vrata Kanta Kshobha. The present sloka for meditation oozes with mystic intuition and will not accommodate such metaphysics. Here, the mood is of bhajan, of devotional application. The forces of love are released to bring about magical transformation, and what was a world of disease, decay, and death is revealed to the sadhaka as a radiant light of everlasting beauty. Just as the heavenly harmony of a flower or a leafless tree is revealed to the aesthetic sensibilities of an artist. Tade tattvam me veti natam jahimaha is at first a seeking of faith, an unconscious but sure instinctive stretching of the soul, newly born to spiritual life, with eyes still closed, and yet groping to grasp the breasts of the mother to suckle. Later, this instinctive clinging to the divine is developed through the disciplines of bhakti into a definite conviction and a slow unfolding of mystical perception. Bhaktya mamabhijanati, says the Bhagavad Gita. We must closely study this process and also this perception so as to evaluate the efficacy and advantage claimed here for this sadhana over any intellectual inquiry without either mistaking the former for sentimentalism or underrating the latter's austere standards. Natam Jahimaha puts forth in simple, succinct words the core of Bhakti Yoga. We shall not forsake thee. We hear in this the echoes of the Upanishads. Peace chant Maham Brahma Nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakarot. It is a deep longing of the soul, for we may call it an intense sense of belonging, a vigilance not to lose that sense. Actions and perceptions of the worldly life, with their internal reactions and expectations, come as a tumultuous onslaught to sweep the aspirant off the sense of belonging to God and God alone. They land him in a condition of miserable identification with a thousand intricately interconnected psychophysical state of being. It is here that the excellence and intellectuality of the path of surrender lies. In Sharanagati, the soul does not fight against evil but continually offers itself to God at every step. A God forsaken world is impossible because God does not and cannot forsake anything since He is everything. The real evil is the evil of non recognition of God's all comprehensiveness. Therefore, the forsaking it, if at all, has to come from the aspiring soul and hence the ardent prayer, Na Tvam Jahi Maha. How does the soul affirm God in all world forms? Though it is an act of faith and hence very personal and subjective, looking to the universal nature of the path of bhakti, we can legitimately expect certain common characteristics of this sadhana. The foremost criteria in this kind of communion, Bhagavad Bhajan, is the conviction that God is the ultimate and absolute cause of the world. God produces an universal scenario through his inscrutable divine power by which he remains supremely independent of means and material for this production. He not only produces but also permeates the scene and is yet supremely unaffected or unchanged by that permeation. Such is the subtle nature of God. He is both the immanent essence of the world and the transcendental reality beyond its subtlest reach. All this is known not so much by argumentation as through a conviction born of an insight into the nature of the universe and its orderly functioning, into the nature of life and the need for it to have a lasting meaningfulness in its totality, apart from the fulfillment of immediate impulses. There is a popular story about a legal practitioner who was an atheist. He thought too much of his reasoning powers with which he could demolish all arguments in favor of God as the creator of the world. To his consternation, one day he discovered his own son praying in front of a picture of God. For many days following, the father subjected his unfortunate son to a tirade of arguments, denouncing an intelligent cause to the world phenomena and providing that particles are naturally evolved through mechanical laws of and automatically formed into organisms and life patterns. The boy quietly listened to everything. On the fourth day, he drew a beautiful picture of a peacock in crayons and placed the sheet on his father's office table. When the master of the house inquired who had placed it there, everyone, including the son, denied any knowledge of it. The man was furious and was pacified when the son offered to collect the information for him. Next day, the son submitted the fruits of his inquiry in this way. You see, Daddy, one block away from our house, there is a shop which sells student stationery. Yesterday, a strong gust of wind blew away a sheet of paper, and some colored crayons also followed suit. They happened to fall on your table, and in ensuing melee, this picture was produced by the crayons crashing into each other. Later on, I found that the crayons had entered through the window of my room and were lying in a corner. The father asked agitatedly, "Have you gone mad? Or are you trying to fool me with such a story?" "But why, Daddy? What is so silly or strange about it? If, according to you, a living peacock can be created by the colliding of unintelligent particles, why cannot colored pencils create a picture of a peacock?" The cogency of the argument struck the father dumb. The advocate in him could see the point boy was arriving at. It became obvious to him that any amount of argumentation cannot induce a man with common sense to believe that such an intricate colored pattern as that of a painted peacock was the product of mere coincidence without any intelligent planning and execution. Similarly, the conviction of God comes naturally and irresistibly to a sensitive soul when it sees the entire world as a superb painting or a sophisticated machinery. Tolstoy was saved from suicide by a sudden arising of faith in God. That was experienced while he was contemplating the rich beauty of the forest. The same has been recorded in different measures of intensity in the lives of a large number of mystics the world over. Bohem gazing at the dazzling light reflected from a burnished piece of pewter, Saint Ignatius Loyola, watching the river flow by, Brother Lawrence shedding tears over the blossoming of an apparently dead winter tree. Sri Ramakrishna observing the flight of white cranes across a thundercloud, to quote a few. The experience had a profound and sustained effect upon the lives of these people who afterwards dedicated themselves completely to the path of God, celebrating Him in all their deeds. That is why Bhagavad Gita says, Mahatmanastu mam partha devim prakritim ashritaha bhajantyananya manaso gyatva bhutadimavyayam. O Parth, great souls who have by nature divine qualities worship me with single-mindedness, knowing me as the imperishable origin of the all that exists. This idea of God as the origin of all may come as the result of an intense superconscious experience, or maybe the gradual outcome of a long drawn sensible research and observation of nature. But having once accepted that God resides in every atom, the devotee begins to develop the habit of invoking God's presence for constant contemplation, conversation, and communion. A shloka attributed to Kalidasa says, Tvam Chandrika Sashini त्रिगमारुच्यै रुचिस्त्वं त्वं स्वादुतासि सलिले सिखिनि त्वमश्मः त्वं चेतनासि परशुपवने बलस्त्वं निः स्मराम मम्ब निखिलं tvadrate yadi syat. You are the silver light in the moon. In the scorching sun, you are the brilliance. You are the sweetness of the waters, the heat of the fire. In man, you are consciousness, power in the wind. Mother, sapless would everything be without you. Meditation upon this life essence infuses in the soul a sense, a sweetness, and divine intoxication that help bhakti to sprout and spread. In this lies the relevance of the Vibhuti Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita and the Ashtamurti Upasana extolled in the Agamas. The eight forms are the essence of the five fundamental elements, the twin forms of cosmic energy, the sun and the moon and Purusha, the conscious principle presiding over the preceding seven forms. Taking hold of the manifested life in its endless variety and artistic grandeur, a sadhaka meditates on these and slowly begins to understand a harmony of life. Sutre Maniganaiva, and enters into the experience of beauty, ras. Beauty is divine, at least in the sense that its experience releases the soul from its sorrow, cramped selfishness, lifts it up, cleanses it of its various corruptions, and infuses a rejuvenating joy into it. I once had to drive through the city of Jaipur, and the capital of Rajasthan, and was disillusioned when I realized that the reputedly well planned pink city in its interior was as congested as any other city. At the end of the drive, we arrived at the Nargad Palace on the top of a hill outside the city limits. Wandering through its deserted magnificence, suddenly I came to a narrow opening in the high fortification and peeped through it to get a panoramic view of the city and the landscape around. From over the vastness of the scene came the hum of life, like the moaning of a sea. It was intensely moving. I realized with a shock that the very streets and sounds which had repelled me while driving through them, were strung in a vaster harmony and grace. During the return drive, they appeared to me to be divine instruments because the vivid experience of their larger harmony and grace, revealed by distance and height, remained fresh in my mind. Then also I realized that such a perspective can be gained inwardly. That such a perspective can be gained inwardly even while standing in the middle of the busy road. One can experience beauty always because beauty in the ultimate analysis is the state of the soul ready to melt in pure love. If awareness is the stuff of the soul, beauty is the sweet flow of it. If Shiva is the soul of the world, and therefore Devi manifested as the world, then Saundarya is the dance of Shiva. On recognizing this, the soul is released from the bonds of sensuality, self awareness. Tumbling down the ridges of senses appears as a cataract of objective perception. If beauty is revealed in that perception, it will help one to listen to the song of the soul behind or through the pulsation of the senses. That perhaps was what mystics like Sri Ramakrishna or Brother Lawrence practiced and achieved. The purification of life in the saint in the same as the chastening that an artist aspires after. When the artist achieves it, the beauty of God's work automatically reveals it, giving him then and there a heightened experience of rasa or beauty. In this experience, beauty is free not only from the form of the object but also from all visible forces and results of life forces. Delightful or disgusting, exalted or lowly, cruel or kind, all these objects can be handled by an artist so as to give rise to an aesthetic experience. If this is true of an artist, how easier should it be for God to achieve that effect? Is it too much to suppose that behind all the ugliness and injustice of life that very often manifest in nature's mad pageant, there is some artistic theme, a beautiful transformation? Puritans will shrink from such an idea, but the lovers of God dare to worship the terrible as well as the pleasing, Mahamari as well as Shakambari, Mahasuri as well as Mahadevi, Kali as well as Gauri. In both, it is the same Samvit. Such a worship can be understood only in the sense of spiritual intuition. No form of life is beautiful in itself, except by the fact that the divine theme plays through it. If one is not well disposed emotionally or intellectually towards the word God, one may as well rephrase it in above sentence statement as the harmony of life. Belief in this harmony arises naturally when a person allows the influence of external nature to sweep over him. Once this theme of harmony is perceived and accepted in the obviously beautiful aspects of nature, One has to discover it in every form that presents itself in order to be true to oneself. It is a challenging, it is a challenge, especially if that form which comes up is not so impersonal and yielding to a person's interpretations as the distant hills or the whispering winds or the sunset. If that form happens to be an individual who reacts to him and questions and corrects his attitude in such an intricate setup of life drama, when each is projecting his world over the others, the question of discovering and maintaining rapport with the harmony of life can be solved only by a spiritual approach. Anand Kumara Swami writes in one place, religion and art are thus names for one and the same experience, an intuition of reality and of identity. Ancient authors of aesthetics like Bharata have also claimed that rasa is Brahmananda Sahodara, all the same. One must learn to see the difference between these brothers. The mystical intuition resulting from the practice of seeing the world as God is not to be confused with the flights of imagination of the poet. We have already referred to this point in the context of Vairagya. The difference becomes more acutely felt in the stage of jnana or spiritual perception. The sadhaka's search has always been for the knowledge of neither things nor God. He seeks the fulfillment of being one with God. He understands that the knowledge of things has neither a relevant end nor a real content, but it may be used as a window to enter into a vast awareness that holds everything. In this sense, we agree with Whitman when he says you must not know too much or be too precise or scientific about birds and trees and flowers and watercraft. A certain free margin and even vagueness, perhaps ignorance and credulity, helps your. We may add, and of those people and our own personality, our business is to discover harmony and taste it. Love alone can do it, not the precision of sense knowledge. Therefore, in speaking of the love of God, the Bhagavad Gita in its 12th chapter dilates upon constant discipline and exercise of high and noble qualities, along with the renunciation of the self centeredness. When the love of God entered into Saint Francis of Assisi, he was seized by an urge to assure himself of his total acceptance and of his freedom from self love. He did it by hugging a leper and kissing his worn filled wounds. Sri Ramakrishna is reported to have approached the slums of Perias and seen at night to cleanse the front yard with his own hand, viewed in this light. The persecution which many saints had to bear in life becomes meaningful. Christ had to carry the cross on the road to Calvary and climb it to proclaim more to himself than to the world. The conviction he had gained at the Mount of Olives, not my will, but thine will be done, then alone love becomes potentially meaningful and tremendously transforming. Laleshwari, the poet saint of Kashmir, a prototype of Rajasthan's Mirabai, was in great physical pain in her last days. But when a Muslim fakir who had come to pay respects to her asked her, why does God give pain to Lalli, his cherished child? She asked back, where is the pain? I see nothing but Shiva's divine light descending in a downpour everywhere, within and without. This is the perfection of the sadhana of Tadeta Tvameveti Natam Jahimaha. Obviously, this is the highest achievement of human excellence. Such a person is divinely elevated and endowed to inspire others while he remains human enough to be able to share life with the common man. Indeed, as the Bhagavad Gita promises, Sasyaham na pranashyami, Sachamena pranashyati. The Lord keeps him always in view, makes him a special instrument through which numberless blessings flow to the human face. God, the Mother, is manifest palpably and is most active through those who are her children in the best realizable sense of the word. Ever taking shelter in her, they go forth in unimpeded and rejoicing and themselves to be divine shelters for countless other souls that come in contact with him. Tvamashrita nam na vipannaranam tvamashrita yastrayantam prayantati prayanti. So with that, fifth chapter of book Paradevata is concluded, and in the end, Acharya Shankar Rachit Pralap Stuti is given with English translation. So there will be one final video on Paradevata, including that aspect. But for now, time to convey my thanks and gratefulness to you all, as well as my pranams at the feet of Swami Shri Ishwarananda Giriji Maharaj with gratefulness, love. So, thank you for being a part of the series, and you may share it with others, and you may like it, or the basic protocol messages which need to be uttered. I did that, and I'm sure it will help you in reconsidering when to to be present. So on that note, lots of pranams at Swami Shri Giriji Maharaj feet. Thanks to all of you. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shankar. Om Namah Parvati Padaya Hara Hara Mahadev.